3 years ago, my partner and I bought our first home. It was a modest place, and our neighbors were wonderful. Life was good. In fact, 18 months later, when those neighbors decided to sell their house, which was larger and had more luxuries like a private driveway, a garage, and a bathtub, we jumped at the chance. We bought their house and put our old one right next door up for sale. After reading several motivation letters from potential buyers, we chose a Polish couple. They only spoke to us in English and not in Dutch like we did, but everything seemed normal. They asked for some tips about the house, and we had some pleasant small-scale small talk. They smiled a lot, and we genuinely believed they would be great neighbors. Looking back, though, that was just the calm before the storm. Even before the big incidents, things felt off. We started experiencing bizarre disturbances at the strangest hours. Sometimes at midnight, we would hear heavy banging vibrating through the shared walls. Other times, incredibly loud music would start blasting without any warning. It was not constant, but it was enough to make us feel like we did not truly know who was living a few feet away. The first real red flag appeared when the husband came home with severe damage to both sides of his car. It looked like he had scraped against a guardrail at high speed on both sides. When we asked what had happened, he gave a clumsy excuse about a concrete pole on one side and a trailer taking a turn too wide on the other. We chose to believe him, even though the math did not add up. One evening around 6 o'clock, the neighbor called us in a total panic. He claimed people were outside his house turning his security cameras away. He begged us to check it out and call the police. We looked, and sure enough, 2 men were actively breaking into his house. We called the police immediately. It took them 20 minutes to arrive, so the burglars were already gone. During the chaos, the neighbor's wife came racing into the street, parked her car, and frantically ran inside to her French bulldog and the police who were already there. As I walked my dog, I saw the husband park his car 3 streets away and walk to the scene as if he was hiding the vehicle from the cops. Later, our doorbell footage showed the burglars standing there before the break-in, calmly discussing which house to target in Polish. Nothing was stolen, and no one was caught. I told the police it felt like a setup, but I never heard back. A week later, I was at a housewarming party when my partner sent me a text. He said the music next door was insanely loud again. A few minutes later, he called me, and his tone had changed to pure terror. The neighbor's car had just come tearing through our front garden and slammed directly into his own front door. 2 men were frantically loading the vehicle with high-end electronics, like flat-screen televisions and professional speakers. They looked like the same men from the week before. This time, the police were much quicker, arriving in exactly 7 minutes and intercepting the men while they were still loading the car. When asked for identification, the men claimed they did not have any. Then, things got completely surreal. The man behind the wheel looked the officer in the eye and claimed to be my neighbor, using my neighbor's actual name. But there was a catch. In the 9 months they had lived next to us, my neighbor had never spoken a single word of Dutch. This man, however, spoke fluent Dutch with a thick Polish accent. Realizing the game was up, the men slammed the car into gear, and a violent pursuit followed until the police managed to box them in and arrest them. But my partner could still hear movement inside the neighbor's house. The police went back inside and dragged out a 3rd suspect. As we were inside our own home with an officer to report the property damage, our doorbell rang. We turned around, and there he was, the actual neighbor. He was completely unrecognizable. His face was a swollen, bloody mess. One of his eyes was swollen shut, his mouth was torn, and his arm hung at a useless broken angle, covered in what looked like defensive stab wounds. He looked feral, aggressive, and utterly broken. The police officer tried to intervene, but the neighbor flat out refused to file a report or cooperate. Since the victim would not speak, the officer had no choice but to send him back to his house. Later that night, the neighbor rang our bell again, trembling. He confessed that he had cheated on his wife, and he claimed she had sent people to take him out. He begged to sleep at our house. Terrified and wanting no part in this underworld drama, we refused. My partner offered to drive him to the hospital instead. We dropped him off at 10:30 that night, telling him we were staying elsewhere because we did not feel safe. But we did not stay elsewhere. We went home, locked every door, and tried to breathe. At around 1 o'clock in the morning, our dog started growling. It was that specific low growl he only uses when someone is at the door. We checked our camera, and there he was. The neighbor was back, standing on our porch, ringing the bell. We sat in the dark, watching the screen in silence. Then, a car turned onto the street. The neighbor panicked, scrambled off the porch, and hid behind our cars in the driveway, crouching in the shadows. The car stopped, and a woman got out. It was his wife. She walked toward her front door, paused, and glanced at our driveway. She saw him. We held our breath, waiting for a confrontation. She walked toward him, and as she stepped into the pale yellow glow of the street lamp, she began to wail, a haunting, guttural crying. He did not say a word, and she kept asking questions, her sobbing getting louder and louder, echoing through the empty street. Eventually, they both got into the car and drove away. We did not see them for 3 days. We did not even know where their dog was. The wife eventually returned alone. She found the dog inside and told us she did not think she would ever see her husband again. Whatever the real story was, whether it involved drugs, debt, or a marriage turned lethal, I realized one thing. I do not think I want to know, but sometimes, the danger doesn't come from a dramatic neighbor caught up in a criminal underworld. Sometimes, the threat is much quieter, sitting right outside your window in the middle of the night, watching your every move. This second story started in 2017, when I moved into a new house in the suburbs of Montreal, Canada, with my parents and my little sister. Before I get into the creepy part, I need to explain a few details about my bedroom and its placement in the house. It was a split-level home. My bedroom sat exactly in between the main floor and the basement at ground level. One wall shared space with the garage, and the opposite side had a large window looking out into the backyard. At the time, that window had plastic vertical blinds with several missing panels. Even when they were fully closed, I could still see outside through the gaps. On the garage side of my room was my closet, which had large sliding mirror doors. This meant that when I was in bed, no matter which side I faced, I could always see my window reflected back at me. I started noticing things about a year after we moved in when I was 15. I had trouble falling asleep, so I usually stayed up late watching YouTube videos on my tablet. One night I heard something outside my window. I had left the window open because it was hot, and we did not have air conditioning yet, so I relied on whatever breeze I could get. After hearing what sounded like footsteps or shuffling, I quickly paused my video and put the tablet down. The noise stopped along with the video, which made me think it had just been part of what I was watching, or maybe my imagination. I resumed the video and heard it again. I looked to my left toward the window but did not see anything, so I eventually fell asleep. For a few nights nothing happened, but a couple of nights later, during my usual late-night routine, I heard the shuffling again. I paused my video and listened, this time longer than before. I swear I could hear soft breathing now too. I glanced at my window, but again there was nothing. I tried to convince myself it was just my mind playing tricks on me, and turned to face my closet instead. As I picked my tablet back up to resume the video, I saw something move at my window through one of the gaps in the blinds reflected in the mirror. A chill ran down my spine. I got up immediately and went to wake up my parents, deciding it was better to be safe than sorry. I told them what I had seen and heard. Even though my dad clearly doubted me, he went outside to check the backyard. A few minutes later, he came back saying he had checked every corner and did not see anything. He said that if someone had been there, he would have heard them come through the squeaky gate, or at least heard them leave. He also checked our Ring camera, which showed no one walking around the house. I suggested the person could have jumped the fence into the neighbor's yard, but he quickly shut that down, saying we lived in a safe neighborhood, and that I should stop watching so many scary movies. Unfortunately, I believed him and went back to bed. Every couple of weeks or months after that, I would hear things again. Each time, I convinced myself it was all in my head and tried to focus on my videos or fall asleep. When winter came and everything was covered in snow, it stopped and I eventually forgot about it. But the following year, it started again. It did not happen often, once or twice a month at most, and always past 11 o'clock. I tried not to pay attention to it, even when the noises sounded like clear footsteps or deep breathing. I watched a lot of scary movies, so I kept telling myself that had to be the reason. I avoided looking at the window altogether, even though I tried to believe it was all in my head. Part of me was terrified of being proven wrong. One night, against my better judgment, I looked. Not directly at the window because that was too scary. I looked at the mirror instead. This time I swear I saw the silhouette of a person. I ran upstairs again, and once again, after checking the entire backyard, my dad told me the same thing he had the year before, and once again I believed him. I started going to bed earlier, watching videos louder with headphones, and completely avoiding looking at my mirror or my window. It always stopped when the weather got colder and started again in mid-spring. One night in early December of 2021, there was a huge windstorm. I was watching a stream with my boyfriend over Discord when I decided to grab a glass of water around 11:30. On my way, I noticed my parents sitting in the living room. It caught me off guard since they rarely stayed up that late, let alone outside their bedroom. Their faces looked tense and preoccupied. I asked if everything was okay, but they brushed it off, assuring me it was nothing. I assumed I had walked in on a conversation not meant for my ears and headed back toward my room. As I turned toward the stairs, flashes of red and blue light caught my attention through the front window. A police car was pulling into our driveway. My parents stood up immediately as if they had been expecting it, and they rushed me back to my room, telling me they would call me if needed. I wanted answers, but I knew it was not the time to push. So I went to my room, curiosity eating away at me. Not even 2 minutes later, I was called back upstairs. This time, they did not keep me in the dark. My dad explained that during the windstorm, he stepped into the yard to make sure nothing had blown over. While scanning the area, he noticed my bedroom light illuminating a man standing motionless outside my window, staring in. My dad yelled and ran toward him, but the man immediately turned, jumped the back fence effortlessly, and disappeared. In that moment, my fears became a fact. I had not imagined it. Someone had really been there. Terrified, my parents called the police and went next door to warn our neighbor, but the older woman refused to open her door, screaming at them to leave or she would call the cops herself. The police arrived, but could do little beyond increasing patrols since my dad did not get a clear look. In retrospect, her hostile reaction feels deeply suspicious. Was she living with that man, or did she mistake my parents for him? Did I know the person who stood outside my window for years, or was it just some creepy neighbor taking advantage of my vertical blinds? Even now, those questions haunt me. Knowing someone was really there makes every sound I brushed off feel so much more terrifying. I have since switched rooms, and mine now faces the street. What scares me most is how long it went on without anyone knowing, and how easily it could have continued. As terrifying as it is to know that someone is watching you from outside your house, there is a level of fear that is far worse. It is the realization that the person watching you isn't outside at all. They are already inside, living right next to you, hidden behind the very walls of your bedroom. This final story took place during a freezing winter in mid-December when I was 15 years old. Originally, my family lived in a crowded apartment in a suburban area of Alberta, Canada, but with my little sister on the way, we desperately needed more space. We felt incredibly lucky when we found a large house just a few blocks away that was selling for an unbelievably cheap price. It wasn't the most beautiful house on the block, and the neighborhood wasn't the greatest, but it had plenty of room for our growing family, and the price allowed us to do some renovations. My dad used what money we had left to fix up the house, focusing mostly on the basement because it was completely damp and unusable. He worked hard, cleaning it, laying down brand new carpeting, reinforcing the structural beams, fixing the small basement bathroom, and putting up fresh wallpaper with a cool pattern that he let me choose myself. My bedroom was set up down there in that newly renovated basement, and for the first few months, everything was absolutely wonderful. I loved having my own private space, but then, the first highly questionable incident occurred. It was my father's birthday, and we decided to celebrate by going out to a nice restaurant for dinner. We had a great time, but when we drove back up to the house later that evening, we were shocked to find our front door wide open. My mother immediately began to panic, and she begged my dad not to go inside. She insisted that we drive away and call the police. My dad, however, was furious. He grabbed a massive, heavy metal wrench from the toolbox in his truck and marched inside to find the intruder himself. While he was inside, my mom and I called the emergency line from the car, waiting through 5 excruciatingly long minutes of pure silence until the police finally arrived. The officers rushed inside and eventually found my dad. They searched every corner of the property and confirmed that the intruder was gone. Oddly enough, absolutely nothing was stolen from our home. However, several of our personal belongings had been physically moved or knocked over. In my basement bedroom, a bunch of books had been pulled off my bookshelf and scattered. The police finished their report and told us to stay vigilant, but they didn't have any suspects. We were understandably paranoid, but we eventually went back inside to try and sleep. From that night forward, I began to hear strange noises. They sounded like they were coming from inside the basement walls, and sometimes from directly underneath the floorboards. Because my room was in the basement, I was highly sensitive to these sounds, but I always brushed them off as old water pipes. After all, it was an old house and old houses make noise. That explanation comforted me until one night, around 2 o'clock in the morning, when everything changed. I was awake in bed, hiding under my blankets, playing games on my Nintendo DS. I had the volume turned completely off so my parents wouldn't realize I was still awake. In the heavy silence of the night, I suddenly heard a sound that made my blood run cold. It was a very clear, distinct human laugh, and it came from inside the wall right next to my bed. My heart froze, and I lay there completely paralyzed, too terrified to move a muscle. I didn't know what to do. Should I ignore it? Should I scream for my parents? Should I investigate? I decided to lie perfectly still and wait. After about 30 minutes of agonizing silence, I convinced myself that my sleep-deprived brain had just hallucinated the sound, and I finally fell asleep. When I woke up the next morning, everything seemed completely normal, so I tried my best to put the creepy laugh out of my mind. Over the next few weeks, I continued to hear those strange noises in the walls, but I forced myself to accept them as a normal part of living in an old home. By this time, my baby sister had been born. Because the basement bedroom was very large, and because my mother trusted me to keep an eye on her, we decided to share the room. My mom set up a baby monitor in our room, keeping the main receiver units in the living room and the kitchen so she could hear us. One weekend night, my parents went out for a late dinner, leaving me home alone to watch my sister. I was upstairs in the living room watching a movie, and around 10 o'clock, I walked into the kitchen to grab a snack. As I stood in the quiet kitchen, my eyes drifted to the baby monitor receiver on the counter. A strange scratching noise was coming through the speaker. I leaned closer, and my heart dropped. Those were footsteps. Heavy, slow footsteps walking around my basement bedroom. Suddenly, my worst nightmare came alive. My baby sister started crying loudly, and then a chilling, whispered shushing sound came clearly through the monitor speaker, followed by a loud crash. I panicked. Acting purely on adrenaline, I did something that could have easily gotten me killed. I ran upstairs to my parents' bedroom and grabbed my dad's hunting rifle from the closet. I didn't have the key to unlock the trigger guard, and I didn't have any ammunition, but I figured I could pretend it was loaded and hide the lock with my hand. If anyone attacked me, I planned to use the heavy wooden stock of the gun as a weapon. All I cared about was getting my baby sister out of that basement. I crept down the stairs, holding the rifle. I opened the door and saw my sister's crib was empty, but she was crying on the floor next to the knocked-over baby monitor. I summoned my courage and yelled that I was armed. No response. I grabbed my sister, ran upstairs, and wedged a chair under the door handle before calling my parents. They called the police and rushed home. The cops arrived first, making us sit in the patrol car while they searched. When my parents got there, I told them everything. The police officer came out and gave an all clear, but my dad asked if they had checked behind the bookshelf in my room. My bookshelf was embedded into the wall, so I was very confused. The officer was confused too, but he went back downstairs with my dad to inspect it. When we gathered in my bedroom, my dad pushed on the side of the bookshelf. To my horror, it swung open like a door. Behind it was a dark crawl space with our utility pipes. But there was more. On the floor lay food wrappers, a missing cup from our kitchen, lotion, a switchblade, and a partially eaten apple that was still fresh. Someone had been living in our basement walls, and we had no idea. The police concluded that while they talked to us outside, the intruder escaped through the basement window, which was wide open with my desk chair under it. They said he likely would not return now that his secret was out, but the worst discovery came a few days later when I explored the crawl space myself. I found a tiny hole in the wall. When I looked through, It pointed directly at my bed and dresser. Whoever was in there had been watching me sleep, get dressed, play video games, and do my homework. They knew my whole life. I am an adult now and live in my own apartment with my boyfriend. But my parents still live in that house today. I constantly pray that whoever was hiding in our walls never decides to return. Thank you so much for watching. Let me know what you thought of today's episode in the comments. And remember, we have a whole playlist of true crime episodes ready for you to binge right now. Until next time, see ya.